Thank you, Don, for that very kind introduction. And thank you to InterSystems for inviting me to come and talk to you today at this fantastic conference. So what I'd like to do today is talk to you about our company, Cognitivity Neurosciences, tell you about the incredible technology we have invented to measure brain health, and tell you a little bit about the impact that that can have on healthcare systems. So all good companies should have some kind of vision, and our vision is to establish a new global standard in the measurement of brain health. And this is very important. And in order to explain why, I'd like to step back for a second and examine the impact that screening tools have had on healthcare. So the use of simple, easy-to-administer tools have had a profound impact on healthcare management and patient outcomes. By using tests in regular health checks, for example, blood pressure to look at the risk of cardiovascular disease, measuring cholesterol levels to look at the risk of heart attacks and strokes, to look at cancer screening by either examinations or things like blood tests to identify disease at the earliest stage when it can be helped most effectively, or even simple measures such as height and weight, which give you an indication of general health. These all contribute to patients being treated more effectively as clinical interventions, whether through preventative action or through treatment. And these can happen at the right time when doctors can do the most to help. But what about our brains? After all, the brain is the most important organ in the body. But incredibly, there's no standard routine assessment for brain health. But looking after the brain should be our top priority. After all, it's essential for quality of life, and incredibly important as we strive towards longevity. And the pressures of brain health are increasing, putting strain on healthcare the world over. And over and above that, awareness is growing amongst patients, who as consumers are demanding more and more from their healthcare providers. So what do we need to do to address this problem? Well, it's been known for a long time that in order to pick up on brain disease, that measurement of cognitive function, and in particular cognitive impairment, is vital. But the current standard of care tests are based on research that's taken place about 30, 40 years ago, and they rely very heavily on memory tests. And these have a number of inbuilt issues. For example, the lack of precision. They use simple linear scales and rely to a certain extent on subjective assessment. They're impractical in that they take upwards of half an hour, are administered by a pen and paper test, and require an expert to supervise them. So it's not exactly scalable. There's dependencies on language and culture. If people are doing these tests in a language that's not their first language, they do less well. So that's a language test. That's unrelated to brain function, to cognitive function. There's a big education bias. People who are more educated do better at these tests. And over and above that, there's a learning effect. So the more often that people do them, the better they get at them, which makes their use for monitoring really not possible. And why do we want to care about early detection? Well, there are two main things. The first one is that outcomes for patients are very, very much better if you detect early. And that's obviously important. The second one is financial. The cost of care savings is incredible from early detection. And just to quote one example, the Alzheimer's Association recently published a report that said that for early detection to take place for all the current dementia population in the US, over the course of their lifetime, that could save up to nearly $8 trillion in healthcare costs. So this is very, very important. But why are we so bad at detecting cognitive issues early? Oops. To a large extent, this is due to the tools. I've done this one, apologies. So how do we address a huge global health problem without adequate instruments? One second. The answer, we believe, could lie in our flagship cognitive assessment tool, Cognica. This is an AI-powered technology. It's a software as a medical device delivered on iPads. And what we do is we look at brain health assessment in a different way, using the latest neuroscience. The technology is fast. It takes less than 5 minutes. and doesn't suffer from any of the biases that we talked about earlier. It doesn't need to be administered by an expert, so it can be used remotely. And like blood pressure tests, it's ideal for the routine monitoring of brain health. So let's have a little look deeper into how this works, as I think you'll find it interesting. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to ask you to look at the screen. Watch it carefully and have a think about what you see. Looks pretty cool on the big screen. But did anyone there see any animals in any of these images? Right, that's great. So you've just taken advantage of a powerful feature of the human brain. Let's look into this in a little bit more detail. So what you've just seen is a short duration natural image followed by what we call an image mask. Now what the test does is it exposes you to a sequence of these and asks you to respond to each one by either tapping left or right on the screen to saying whether or not you saw an animal. This is what we call a rapid visual categorization task, which measures speed of information processing by the brain. And this is testing the brain's ability to process complex information. Now, to use a computing analogy, with the memory tests that have traditionally been used, this is like testing the hard drive of the brain. So this is reading and writing of information. What we do that's different is that we look at the CPU of the brain and measure its processing power. Now, what the system does is it takes this information of your responses and accuracy to these images. Our AI algorithms look for patterns in those which are recognized as part of early impairment, and the test is very, very good at this, at picking up on the earliest signs of impairment. And the use of animal images is no accident. It's very important. Like I said, this taps into an innate ability in humans to recognize animal stimuli. And you can see why this might be important to our ancestors. Because if you're out there in the bush foraging, it probably benefits you largely to see an animal so you can run towards it to catch it, or indeed to recognize one that's going to run after you and catch you. So it's definitely a handy feature. And this is culturally consistent, and the test doesn't need any supervision, so it can easily scale. So let's look at what happens in the brain during the test. Well, actually, unbeknownst to you, it worked very hard. What happens here is the image enters through the eyes into the retina. The information is transmitted to the visual cortex, which is a huge part of the back of the brain, and it has a limited amount of time to extract the relevant information to send to your prefrontal cortex, which then can recognize patterns. The output then runs up through the motor cortex and into your hands. So in the space of a few hundred milliseconds, the brain works very hard. And this is important because this is examining the brain holistically. And this is where the latest neuroscience comes in. By examining as large a body of neurons as possible, you're able to look for small changes in performance. And that's what enables its ability to pick up on early stage impairment. And this can be used in a number of ways. For example, for concussion, for both detecting and monitoring. It can be used to help find the right patients for new drugs coming in neurodegeneration when it's vital to administer them at the earliest stage. It can be used for things like fit to fly or for testing whether people are able to make critical decisions well. But importantly, it enables people to take control of their brain health so that they can understand what's going on and have agency over that and to get the best out of their brains. So how does this sit alongside other methods available to clinicians? Well, like we said, it's fast, scalable, and its convenience and practicality makes it ideal for routine examinations, which doesn't currently happen. These other approaches that I spoke about, the traditional approaches, these are useful for specialists. They have a role to play there, and our technology is complementary to these. And if you look at techniques like imaging and biomarkers, these are very important techniques, but they're expensive and invasive. So the key here is to send the right people at the right time into these techniques so that diagnosis can be done early when treatment is at its most effective. So where did all this come from? Well, the technology was born at Cambridge University, the place where DNA was discovered, and stem cells, and techniques like IVF were first developed. We've taken that technology and built an IT infrastructure which is built for delivery and scale. We validated it the right way through well-designed clinical studies and publishing results in peer-reviewed journals. These data have enabled us then to go and get our FDA registration done. We're CE marked, so we can go into clinical environments in the US and in Europe. And we've developed key partnerships with fantastic organizations. Firstly, with InterSystems. This is our choice of data partner. Through the NHS, where our first deployments in the UK enabled us to get clinical feedback and user needs. We also have great research partners, such as Alzheimer's Research UK, which enabled us to get the best quality clinical studies done. So what can this be used for then? Well, we're already in use in a number of clinical settings. In the Middle East, with the Dubai Health Authority, we're deployed in primary care for early dementia detection. This is screening to look for the early stages of disease. At the Clemenceau Medical Center, we're used to complement the monitoring of treatment for migraine, so they can see whether it's being effective. At the South London and Maudsley in London, we're used as part of the specialist approach to treating patients remotely and measuring how well they're getting on and responding to treatment without bringing them into the clinic. With Wellbeing Digital Sciences, we're monitoring the effectiveness of ketamine treatment for depression and PTSD. In the Emirates Health Services, this is a population-wide project that's looking at population health management and management of risk around brain health. And in Prime, we're doing corporate health. This is with a particular emphasis on anxiety. So what's really great and gratifying about this is that clinicians are finding different ways to use our platform to add value to their practice. So let's look in a little bit more detail at the way Cognica can impact a clinical pathway. In this case, the pathway for dementia. What currently happens is that the first detection of a problem comes for the primary health care. The primary health care practitioner has to use a subjective assessment in order to decide whether something might be wrong with the patient. So that requires the patient to present with either fairly noticeable impairment or a relative to give some voice of concern. And there's no tools to easily assess this, so the doctor has to either assess and refer or let them go. And if they go, they fall right out of the system. What happens at secondary level as a result of this is that they tend to get two types of patients. Either those that are fairly significantly impaired, and there's not an awful lot they can do to help them, or they get the worried well, and these are healthy people who have complained enough to their doctor to get a referral. Now, each of these is not making the best use of time of these specialists because specialist treatment is expensive and it takes up a lot of time, so it's very inefficient. And over and above that, when patients are in the treatment process, in order to be assessed, they come back in. They have to be brought back into the clinic, okay? So the wrong people are being sent to the specialist, and this is expensive and time-consuming. This is inefficiency in the system. So what happens if we introduce the right tool to allow quick, reliable assessment into the system? Well, Cognica can be taken much like a blood pressure test as part of your annual health check. Then any issues with brain health can be notified to the clinician. They can then use this in the context of other information they have about the patient to make a good clinical decision, a confident clinical decision to refer. Then what happens at secondary is they're going to get they can use the test to triage and to confirm and use it as part of their diagnostic process, but they're getting the right patients. These are early stage patients that are at the right moment to be helped. Then, when they're in treatment, they can be monitored from home so they don't have to keep getting called back into the clinic unless it's absolutely necessary. What's also good about this is we have a consistent measure of information about brain health throughout the whole process. And that's great having that data, but obviously, if it's not available to the right person at the right time, then it's not much use to us. And that's where InterSystems come in. The ability to have this available data, high availability, so that the clinicians can make the best possible decisions. So what's the overall vision for the technology? Well, we're interested in this being available anywhere at any time. The flagship medical device is delivered on iPads, but basically this technology can be delivered anywhere you can see an image and measure a response. So that can be things like through browsers, mobile devices, gaming consoles, through virtual reality. We've also developed a software development kit which enables this technology to be consumed in third-party app systems, like, for example, in telehealth. We have a vision for it to be available through EHR. And also in places like pharmacies, where people should be able to drop in and have their brain health easily assessed. And all this then starts to enable what should be a fundamental right for people to be able to know how healthy their brain is and to quickly access care. Because this shouldn't be the preserve of people with the most comprehensive and expensive health care. Now, we're very excited about the future, and we believe that things for brain health are going to improve over the coming years. We're a small company, but very ambitious. But we'd love it if you want to come and talk to us and join us on this mission. We're here at the conference. We have a booth at the partner pavilion, so come and say hi and try it out for yourselves. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for your attention, and thank you to Terry, Don, and the team for having me here, and have a great conference.